we no longer live in a shared reality.
No matter what, emotion will always win out over facts, sadly.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just the truth. The media should be scrutinized. We still have a lot of influence. That's how you build trust and you build a connection with your audience.
Hi, Media Founding Editor Colby Hall, and this is Press Club. And on today's exciting episode, we have longtime CNN star, co-anchor of The Situation Room, and owner of a new puppy, Pamela Brown.
I love that you threw that into my title.
There we go.
Thank
Well,
you.
I think it's sort of, do you prefer Pam or Pamela, or does it matter?
I really don't care, but my mother cared. And Pamela, she always wanted to be Pamela. So if you notice, Wolf Blitzer only calls me Pamela because my mom called him one day,
And said,
years ago, and was like, her name is Pamela, not Pam. So
sounds like maybe you were in trouble. Pamela Brown?
I know, exactly. Yeah. So on air, we stick with Pamela, but I have all kinds of names off air.
So you posted on social media that, I believe, if I understood it correctly, you just got a new puppy.
Yes.
And you have an
Blitz.
older dog who is being super petulant and like just kind of protesting the fact that there's a new dog in your life?
Oh, my dog Bingo, my 5-year-old lab, is pouting. I mean, protesting. He went on a hunger strike first. He then just retreated to his crate because labs don't do hunger strikes very long. They're big eaters. So then once he couldn't sustain that, then it was like, I'm going to just hang out in my crate. But when I come out, he started to limp. And we were like, oh my God, wait, is he injured? And so we're like, let's do a test. So I got a piece of cheese, because again, labs love food. And I stood across the room and I was like, Bingo, come. And guess what?
The limp went away.
The limp went away immediately. And I turned to my husband and I said, he was a military dog handler. And so he knows a lot about dogs. I was like, wait, did he fake an injury? And my husband said, yes, actually, dogs fake injuries.
That's excellent.
And so I did some Googling, and it is true. And so Bingo is really having a rough time, but everyone tells me, give it a few weeks, give him space from Lucy Blitz, and he'll come around.
So Bingo has a little bit of a main character syndrome. Where do you think he gets that from?
I don't know. You know what?
TV people.
TV people ego. We're all about the ego, right? And we just like to have all the attention on us. So, maybe old mom pass it on to him.
I think the interview's good. I think we got everything we need.
Okay, great. We can just wrap it up.
So let's start at the beginning. All right.
Okay, let's go.
You grew up in Kentucky.
Yep.
Daughter of the governor and a well-known television host. People of a certain age know your mother well from CBS NFL Today with Brent Musburger, Jimmy the Greek, and Irv Cross. What was it like for you growing up with parents that were so well known and I dare say famous in your world?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely grew up in the public eye, but I also, growing up in Lexington, Kentucky, I also felt like I had a very normal, grounded childhood. And I give my parents a lot of credit for the people they surrounded me with, and also just the friend group that I had, that they were just amazing. And so while my parents were quote unquote famous, I didn't really pay much attention to it, and I just kind of did my own thing. I was like I loved riding horses, I loved playing soccer, I loved hanging out with my friends, and I loved growing up in Kentucky. And the people that were around me were just sort of salt of the earth people. And okay, we're all human beings. Who cares if you're famous or not? It actually taught me a lot about power and influence and fame, and how it doesn't necessarily lead to happiness as well. I think a lot of people in the media business might be trying to climb this ladder of more and more and more, and I want to become famous.
Never happy.
Having had two famous parents, it actually put a lot in perspective for me.
Right.
That you can, have this insatiable appetite, and you may never be happy. And not to say that my parents didn't, they weren't happy. I mean, but they were human beings just like everyone else.
Everyone suffers from the same human condition.
Exactly. Everyone suffers from the same human condition. And so I'm really grateful in many ways that I had the upbringing I did to learn that at a young age.
Well, I mean, I said this earlier, joking, in today's culture, you'd be dragged as a, quote, Nepo baby. But I will say that you have shown yourself to be, you're on CNN, you're in DC, you're sort of inside kind of, the star maker machinery, so to speak, from a political news perspective. But you do come across as very grounded, right? And is there anything specific from apart from being in Kentucky, or perhaps maybe your mom being on TV, that has kept you sort of more rooted? Was it, I don't know, like education, church, or, what was it that your parents did that kept you so sort of down to earth?
That's really nice of you to say. I do give my parents a lot of credit. First of all, they never pushed me to pursue this career path. In fact, my dad discouraged me. He was like, you're never going to be able to live up to, what your mom did. But I never felt that pressure. I was like, well, I want to do my own thing. I don't want to go into sports, but I want to be a journalist. And ever since I was young, I loved asking questions and learning from people and talking to people. I've always been interested in people. And so my mom, for her part, never pushed me either. Never pushed me into pageants. She was Miss America. She was always just like, follow your heart and what you think you're good at. And Pam, you love interviewing. You love asking questions. So maybe, if that's what interests you, pursue that. And so I think that gave me an inner confidence to just kind of pursue what I'm passionate about. And I've thought a lot about the whole Nepo baby thing. And I'll never be able to say definitively if I would be where I am now without my parents, right? Who can actually say that, right? But what I can say definitively is that I am so grateful, and I never take what I have for granted, and I try to work hard every day and take advantage of the opportunity and the blessings given to me. And I think that helps keep it in perspective. And the groundedness, I do think it comes from Kentucky and just growing up with just great people and sort of just being able to relate to people. But also, I think it comes from my genuine passion for what I do.
Right.
I'm in it because I love being a journalist and talking to people. And I think through that, and I look at my role as a vehicle for people and telling their stories and helping the public understand what's happening in the world around them. And so I look at myself as a vehicle for that, not sort of some big, TV star. And I think maybe that's what helps me stay grounded, because I'm just a vehicle for people.
I think also if you see everyone as a person that deserves the same respect that you would get, it makes it a lot easier. And I think sometimes people get a little bit caught up in that. Yeah. And, I'm reminded of this because last year was a big, big year for you in a lot of ways, but you did some amazing reporting surrounding the tragedy in Camp Mystic.
Thank you.
In the Hill Country in Texas. And what was really sort of, I thought, informed your reporting was that you had been a camper there. Mm-hmm. And it's a Christian girls camp. And I grew up in Hutchinson, Kansas, and church camps and Christian camps are sort of like Boy Scout camps. They're standard. I think some people hear Christian camp and they think of cults or some sort of other thing. First of all, what was it like being a camper there? And then following, how did that make your reporting harder or easier given your relationship with the institution? I
think it made it harder in that it just brought back this flood of emotions. And I went back to the archives and found my old bracelet and letters I wrote home, letters I wrote to my mom who was no longer here.
Right.
Those memories came flooding back of my mom dropping me off at camp and the homesickness I felt at camp. And also just the love I had of being there and the outdoors at Camp Mystic and the amazing transformative experience you have there as a kid. And so it was a really unique experience for me because I was grappling with sort of that personal emotion of being a former camper and everything flooding back. But then also, I was a professional. I had to be a professional and be a journalist and report what was happening. And it also, though, being a mother added another layer to it because I had a little girl, and you just think about how awful it is. These sweet little innocent girls swept away in the floods and what their parents and the pain they must be feeling. So it was by far the hardest story I've ever had to cover, but also the most important, I feel like, because I felt like I could give a window into what was happening on the ground that others couldn't, just by the fact that I was a camper there, right? And there were other challenges. I mean, we were up against law enforcement. They create a lot of barriers for the media. They made it very clear that they did not want us there. The people there on the ground were not, for the most part, a lot of people I interacted with were very skeptical because I was with CNN, and so I had to gain their trust and talk to them and let them know I was there to share their stories for nothing else.
Well, I would imagine that also the fact that you weren't just sort of flown in from DC to represent CNN and to cover the story, but that you had personal experience as a kid there was something that maybe eased your access or maybe generated some you know this camp because you had been a camp? Was that?
I think the fact that I was a camper there did help with like people opening up to me, like, oh, you went to camp there. Also, my mom and my family is from Texas.
Got it.
So I already had a deep Texas connection. I'm from Kentucky, but I also like basically grew up in Texas too, because my mom was always taking us there, and she has deep roots. She was Miss Texas, and then she became Miss America, Miss Texas. So I always try to find, whenever you're a journalist and you're doing a story, you always try to find a common connection, right?
Of course.
And so I would, when I talk to people who may have been skeptical and didn't want to talk to me, I would bring up, I was a former camper, my mom's from Texas, and I grew up coming here, and I just would love to hear what you have to say and how this is impacting you. And you find that people will open up and they look at you in a different way than maybe their preconceived notions.
It must have been really challenging to speak with, on camera, parents who are in their most raw state of grief, having just learned that they've lost a loved one. And I honestly think that, that's an important story to tell and to get across, but also it requires unbelievable nuance and care to make sure that it does not come across as in any way exploitative or, not disrespectful, but just tonally, that must be really challenging. And I'm curious what you used or what you did to broker that.
Well, it took some building of trust and also just giving them the opportunity. Some grieving parents want to share their story and highlight the legacy of their child, right? It's cathartic for them. It's therapeutic for them. And so I offered myself up as I said earlier, like a vessel for that, sharing that story and taking care and being a good steward of that and being respectful. And others, I said, I'm giving you the opportunity, but don't feel any pressure, And so I just kind of put it out there on the table. And then over time, they would come to me or they would open up. And others didn't want to, but actually I found that many did once they sort of went through the initial shock of what happened. They did want to tell the story. They did want to talk about their daughter, and they did want to talk about accountability for Camp Mystic. And so I covered that story for many months. I didn't just leave. The thing that sometimes irritates me as a journalist is like you just get so wrapped into a story. You're there on the ground, you're in it, and then you just like leave it behind. And I couldn't just leave it behind, right? And of course there was a personal connection to it, but I wanted to make sure that I was also sharing, what was going on with Camp Mystic. And I had the Camp Mystic lawyer on because no one had heard from Camp Mystic. And I was the first to have him on. I mean, I wanted to just stay on it and continue to shine a spotlight. But at the same time, at some point, you just have to come to grips with like, all right, Pam, your heart is so in this, but maybe this isn't where the news cycle is right now, and you have to kind of...
Well, there's going to be a one-year anniversary, and that will probably be a good follow-up. And, I was a big camp counselor, and I understand, like, everything comes with risk. And there's this sort of every camp just kind of operates with their fingers crossed that tragedy doesn't strike. And, sometimes you get, overly confident that will happen. And anyway, you did wonderful reporting there.
There were no villains, right? I mean, that's the thing. It's like... There's no villains in the story. It's not like covering a school shooting or something like that where there's a clear-cut, like, bad guy. Right? I mean, I think being there on the ground, clearly there was some incompetency. There were things that they fixed. There was things they should have done years before, right? Not just Camp Mystic, but just the city, the town. And they learned from that, sadly. But they had to learn from that through this tragedy of so many lives lost. And it was one of the few times, Colby, that I actually, like, got emotional on camera and cried, which I try not to do, but I also feel like, it was raw and it was authentic and it was in the moment. And Anderson Cooper asked me about my time as a camper, and I started talking about it. And then I just started thinking about those letters that those little girls who had died had sent home, and they're going to be arriving in the mail to their parents, their grieving parents. And I just that just hit me. That hit me hard.
Yeah.
And again, it wasn't planned, it just happened. But I think it also taught me, like, sometimes it's okay to show a little bit of emotion because it helps the viewer understand the story.
Well, it's authentic, right? And also Anderson is sort of the guy that seems to elicit the most sort of like genuine conversations about grief and death. And
he's lost his mom too.
Right, and he's very good at that. And I felt
safe doing it. It was like, even though everyone, it's like I'm on live on television, because it was Anderson, I felt safe.
Yeah.
And
well,
then
it didn't come across as performative.
Note. Yeah, he sent me the nicest note after, and he's so supportive.
That's lovely.
And but he's an amazing colleague, and you're right. He created that safe space in that moment because he understands grief so deeply.
So this is sort of a nice pivot to the new doc that you have coming for Whole Story. It's coming out in a few weeks, I think, about the rise of Christian nationalism, right?
Yes.
It's going to be on Sunday, and I was able to watch a small snippet in advance. But why don't you just explain what this hour-long special is about?
So I traveled to Moscow, Idaho last year and interviewed Pastor Doug Wilson. And he is the head of this network of churches called CREC that the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is a part of. And I've always been interested in this subject. And as I was thinking about Pete Hegseth and the way he was bringing in prayer into DOD and doing other things, and some of the tweets coming out of DOD around religion, I wanted to better understand the thinking of his church network that could be influencing him as the DOD secretary,
right,
and kind of give us a window into that. And so I reached out to Pastor Wilson, and he was open to doing the interview. He, made it clear, CNN, he said, is on the other side of the barrier, and, and was definitely made it clear that he viewed us as sort of the enemy. And
he distrusted you.
He distrusted me, and I tried to make clear to him, look, I'm just really interested in your worldview and your thinking. Please just allow us to come out, talk to you, and understand it, because you're growing in influence, and that can be shown through various metrics, but he just opened a church in D.C., Hegseth attended, and other prominent members in D.C. So he's getting closer to the seat of power, and it's important to understand his thinking. That's growing in influence. So he agreed. We traveled out there, and I interviewed him for an hour and a half, and it was a very respectful interview. Of course, I did my due diligence as a journalist and pushed back and challenged him in different areas. But there was this one moment that ended up going viral where he has very strict views of gender roles. And he really believes that, the man should go out and be the breadwinner, and a woman's primary role is to be a mother and be a housewife and take care of the husband and so forth. And the complementary roles. He does not believe in egalitarianism. So I asked him, what do you think a woman's role is in society? And he said, without missing a beat, women are the kind of people that people come out of. And I sat there waiting for him to expand on that, and he didn't. And so
full stop.
That was it. That was his response. And so I just had this very kind of authentic, raw reaction. And I said, well, hold on a second. So you just think we're a vessel? That's, and then he went on to say, well, no, it's not like pigs and horses. It doesn't take any talent. They reproduce too, just like women do, but
it's not animal husbandry.
Right. But, then you become, once you have a child, then you become the CEO of the home. And, we think it's a bad thing to throw your kids in daycare. And that went viral. Many millions of views. And I think it just really struck a chord with a lot of people that, wait a second. Who is this guy? And he thinks this way, and a lot of people think this way. And wait, the DOD secretary, he retweeted my piece.
Yeah, I don't want to be all fawning, but I would say what struck me in that interview was that you pushed back, but respectfully, and you asked for, I think you even asked if I'm a working mother, do I offend you? And he said, no, but, and, it was really good journalism because it allowed your subject to reveal his true belief without you sort of painting him in a corner. You just sort of asked simple questions that he responded, and sort of hung a lantern on how such starkly different views exist in our society.
Right, and I think that's important. My approach was, I'm not going in with judgment. I'm going in with curiosity.
Right.
Who am I to judge, right? I'm really going in with a genuine curiosity. And I think he could feel that. I wasn't out to get him, right? It was just hey, like, help me better understand this, you know? And
you were nice.
Well, but I think you can be nice and firm. And I think people can feel that, right?
You weren't confrontational. You weren't you didn't go in looking to gotcha. You went in looking for answers that were to genuine questions. And I think people sense a difference in it. People open up. That's what a good interviewer does. They make people feel comfortable enough so that they can say what they really believe instead of trying to formulate answers that they think you might want to
exactly,
hear.
Or be adversarial. And actually, after that interview aired, he wrote a really nice blog post, not to toot our own horn, but saying he thanked us publicly, saying
Here we
they
go.
were very
Toot
fair.
your own horn
Toot
again.
the horn, but I want to, because I think it showed something. He started this off saying CNN thinking we were the enemy. And then he ended it after we did the journalism, thanking us and saying they didn't just put the provocative parts out there, they put the context out there around the provocative parts or the controversial parts. And it actually I thought, well, I hope that opens the minds of others who may have had the same thinking as him, who looked at us a certain way. Because I know his views were changed. They opened up, and now he's in this hour-long documentary, but we expanded beyond that. We embedded into a community in Taylor, Texas of Christian nationalists under the CREC network. And I will say to this, they were lovely and welcoming, and these are their deeply held beliefs, right? This is what they believe in. They believe this is what the Bible mandates, that this is to be a Christian nation, and they are having kids to make them kingdom builders. And they really firmly believe that women, their primary role is in the home, and they believe that's what the Bible is telling them. And it opened my mind up too as a journalist, going in and embedding with them and spending some time with them, right? I think we're in this culture now where everyone wants to vilify, like good guy, bad guy, right? Yeah. Because of their belief system. And people come to their worldview or belief system for so many different reasons, right? I mean, I know as I grew up in Kentucky and spent time in Texas, and I had parents who were famous and gave me different experiences. Of course, that shaped my worldview. And for many of the people I spoke to, they were raised in religious homes, and they felt like this is the way that you're supposed to live. And I want people to understand that. Now, we also spoke to women who had left the church. Different churches, different conservative Christian denominations, Christian patriarchy is what they call them. And they were very, very clear that they were happy to leave, and that structure can really lead to abuse, is what they said. That when you create a hierarchy where women are at the bottom, subservient and submissive to the husband, and you create that hierarchy, that can lead to abusive situations.
It doesn't
without
always work
recourse.
out well. It doesn't always end with a happy ending.
It doesn't mean that everyone has that experience in these communities, but if it goes to its natural conclusion with someone who might have controlling or abusive tendencies, you see where that can lead. And some of these women had those experiences, and it took a while for them to unravel and deconstruct and leave. And it was really hard because in these communities, the other is seen as the bad guy. It's like David and Goliath, and they believe that secularism and non-secularism cannot coexist, right? So it's like one's going to win out. And for them, the outer society, the outside society is bad, and don't
it's
go.
Goliath.
Yeah, exactly. They think public school, many of who I spoke to, again, you can't say it's not a monolith necessarily, but a lot of them I spoke to thought public school is a sin. And so these women who I spoke to who left, who have experienced whether it's emotional abuse or physical abuse, they really sounded the alarm of what can happen in these high control religious communities. And they drew the line to the Trump administration and how we're seeing the influence of Christian nationalism grow within this administration in a way that we've never seen historically.
Well, I helped my son do a junior year paper on Night in the Garden, which was the 30s Nazi rally that was a Christian rally. And he opened his paper with, the Mark Twain quote, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And lo and behold, there were a lot of people that felt that the Trump rally at the end of the election at the Madison Square Garden echoed some of those themes. And I'm curious, in this documentary, I only saw the segment where you're in Tyler, Texas. Taylor, yeah. Sorry. How explicit do you direct that? And is there, and maybe the final cut isn't sort of locked, but Do you connect it to the Trump administration? Does this come across as a warning or more of a observation that this is a rising trend?
I don't look at it as my place as a journalist to use it as a warning, right?
This isn't alarmist or even a concern. It's more of this is happening and we should be aware.
This is showing all sides, right? And both sides, right? Like the women who have left and others who are Jewish or other faiths, right? Or even Christians, think that they're an existential threat. They're, as in these Christian nationalist groups, right? These Christian nationalist groups believe that America has gotten so far away from the Christian values that it's an existential threat to them, and that we need to get back to Christian values to survive as a society. And so it's more examining the roots of these movements and that existential pull from both and why they feel that way. And it's really up to the viewer to decide what they think about it. I mean, I can tell you that just on what I've received from social media, a lot of people are very worried about it, just the growing influence, because they look at it as a way of being regressive, taking away women's rights. I mean, I interviewed the pastor under Doug Wilson who said, look, the 19th Amendment should be repealed because they believe there should be household voting, the man should vote. And I said, well, as a woman myself who votes, I said, well, help us better understand that thinking. He said he thinks that individualism in society has led to a breakdown in society. And he thinks it's about the family unit and we need to have more cohesion. So, people can watch it and take away what they want, but they should be aware of it. They should know that this is a consequential moment in America, and Christian nationalism influence is at its highest peak per the experts we spoke to, even as Christianity as a whole is on the decline.
It's fascinating, and I honestly grew up going to church, and I was on a church council when my kid was at preschool at Plymouth Congregational in Brooklyn Heights, and but I keep it to myself, right? And but I do believe that you went to a Christian camp.
I grew up Christian. I grew up going to a Christian,
and I think that. Almost religion aside, and this is maybe me being a Congregationalist, a raised Congregationalist, the sense of community that we felt from churches and schools and Little League and any other affinity seems to have really abated to a dangerous level, right? It seems like
I think you're right.
We're isolated by the social media and the internet and the constructs that kind of kept us tethered in the social fabric. Churches, schools, PTAs, what name have largely gone away. And you can see how the pendulum has maybe swung really hard in some cases where you see Christian nationalists. Do you think there's something to that?
I think absolutely you're right. And I will say when I embedded with the community in Taylor, Texas, that was what stood out to me the most. Everything was interwoven. They did seem really happy. And they did have a strong, tight-knit community, right? They were all watching each other's kids and helping each other out. The kids were just out there kind of roaming around, playing with each other, different ages.
Idyllic.
And and there is something to that, and that can't be ignored. Now, I asked Doug Wilson, the pastor, at what point would you call this a cult, right? And he said, look, people lament not having community, and then as soon as you build community, they say you have a cult. We're Christians, we believe things.
It's a fair point. And I'm not a Christian nationalist, and I think a lot of what he stands for is not for me, at least, but, I can agree that a strong family structure is good for society and good for the family. Not always, but so there are parts to their argument that ring true. It does feel extremist.
Yeah, I mean, certainly their views are extreme. They are rigid. There is no wiggle room. There is no opening up my mind, there was no talking to them and saying, well, hold on a second, what about this? It's they have their views and that is it. And both can be true, right? That they could have these views that are seen as extreme and rigid, but also they have a great sense of community and connection that many of us in this country have lost, right? And so that's what I think is going to be really interesting for the viewers of this, to just look at it and look at all sides of it and the complexities of it and decide for themselves how they want to view it.
Well, I look forward to seeing it. This could become a religious studies conversation, so I
could go on and on. I really could.
It's fascinating. I want to pivot back to something you said about the interview with Doug Wilson and how he sort of had a prejudiced opinion about CNN and vis-a-vis you. And I suspect you probably also received, you said you got the same when you went to Camp Mystic, and I assume also in Taylor.
Well, Taylor only let us in because of the interview with Doug Wilson. They said,
interesting.
Because you were fair to him, we let you in. Otherwise, there was no way we would have.
So what is it behind this deep skepticism that exists, particularly in Middle America, particularly in conservative circles, of CNN?
It's not just of CNN, I think. I mean, obviously,
you work for CNN.
Get targeted by this White House that will single us out, unfortunately. I think that there's just an anti-establishment, anti-institution sentiment that's growing.
Did you find that that was a barrier for you to broker, that you were representing kind of... Some of my dearest friends in Kansas still think of me as an elitist, and they belong to multiple country clubs and live large, and I'm in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn.
Right.
Like, how am I elitist? But there is this sort of connotation that if you work in media, and a lot of it is well earned.
Yeah,
there is a lot of elitist cultural media, sort of Ivy League, that sort of sneer at Middle America. And so I think the distrust is in many ways earned. But I'm curious more about, like, how did you win over... Do you think CNN is in any way, over the last 10 years, it's been a tough years, this is a problem in part of some of their making?
I mean, look, I always think we should self-examine, and we're not perfect. Of course, there are things, if you go back, said, we should have done that differently, right? I mean, of course, but what I can say is, and I wish people understood this more. I mean, people still think that I am told every day I'm like a puppet, and the corporate overlords are telling me what to do and don't do this.
It's stunning.
And it's stunning when I tell people that. Really educated people are like, really? You have editorial independence? And I'm like, yeah, I decide, who's coming on my show, what questions I'm asking them. So I see the amount of tireless work and effort that goes into verifying what we put out there, especially in this AI age, and making sure we're being fair to guests and all of that, right? But we're also up against a really tough time. And it is true, you have a president who has repeatedly said, we're fake news, over and over and over again, And so that's very hard to compete with. Now, that's not to absolve CNN or other press organizations from anything we could have done differently or better. And I do think you're right about there are times where we're too in the bubble with horse race politics and that sort of elitist view that
well, nobody's perfect, and there's always room for...
You should always examine and scrutinize, and that's why I actually appreciate media. I think the media should be scrutinized. We still have a lot of influence. We should be held to account.
Tell me more what you like about media.
Because you want to toot your own horn. But no, I'm a big believer. We should be held to account,
Thank
right?
you.
If I give a softball interview to a person in power, I should be called out for that.
The rarest thing in political media, politics and media, is the individual that says, you know what, you're right, I got that wrong.
But that's how you build trust, by the way.
That's a fair critique. I write columns and someone will say well, you missed this. I'm like, yeah, I didn't make that clear. I mean, I sort of assumed that, but that's fair. I was, I could have been clearer on that.
See, that's great because guess what? As far as I know, there has never been a perfect human being. Has there been?
I
don't know. You're pretty close to it, Colby.
There.
Pretty close. So my view is always every day I'm learning and I can evolve and get better and grow. And so if I get feedback from someone who I respect, and I'm like, okay, you know what? You're right. I'm going to do better next time and don't make the same mistake again. Why are we so afraid to admit mistake and be transparent? To me, that's how you build trust and you build a connection with your audience, in my opinion. So
I have to ask the question about sort of the undermining of credibility of CNN and mainstream media very systemically by President Trump and his surrogates. Again, caricatures and stereotypes exist because they're somewhat rooted in the truth, so there is some resonance there.
Right, yeah.
But how have you dealt with, it seems like the network is constantly trying, almost is challenged to have any voice at all because for fear of being accused to be biased. And so sometimes it's almost too neutral. How has the network, how do you work to deal with, I mean, you have Trump surrogates on and you ask them tough questions, but people will say why are you platforming someone who's speaking about election lies that are baseless? How do you strike that balance between engaging with the executive branch and their positions, even if you know that their positions may not always be accurate, fair, or even true?
I think it's a really fair question. I've thought a lot about this. And look, we're not a monolith. So you might ask another CNN journalist and they could have a different viewpoint.
They'll get it wrong, but I'm asking you.
But my viewpoint is these are people in power, and it's just like the Christian nationalists. This is happening, and you may not agree with it, and you may think it's totally wrong, and the facts might totally undercut everything they're saying. Guess what? That's my job, to push back with the facts, with the evidence. But people need to understand what is happening. People need to understand, in my view, the thinking of Stephen Miller and like the thinking of President Trump and others that are in power that are shaping this country and its future and the world global order, right? Like, people should understand that, in my view. And I think sometimes people like to shoot the messenger, right? Yeah. It's like, why are you platforming him? And then sometimes when I engage with people who will reach out to me because they didn't think I was hard enough or whatever, you should have asked about this. It's like, I'll respond to them in a very respectful way. Just say, could you be a little more clear? I'd like to better understand how what you felt like was off. And then they say, oh my gosh, you know what? It's not you. It's just, I'm so upset about this environment we're in right now. And, and I think it really triggers it triggers a deep sort of visceral feeling in people when they come on the show. And there's no matter what you do, it'll never be enough. But that's not my job to please the public or please the internet. I view my job as having on people of power from all different spectrums and all different politics and holding them to account and challenging them and letting people just take that in the way they feel they want to take it in.
I understand, I guess, the logic behind platforming people that are not sort of good faith actors.
Yeah.
However, one of the big problems I have with a lot of that line of thinking is that if you sort of net it down, you arrive at like hoping that ignoring the problem will make it go away. And it's a real tricky situation to be able to, because at the end of the day, we no longer live in a shared reality. Like
I know, it's really sad, right?
And
like, do people care about the facts like I do?
Well, we can't even agree on the same set of facts, right?
I know.
And it almost makes journalism, which is entirely based on objective reporting of facts, it almost renders it moot or useless in a postmodern age where everything is subjective. And
it's a scary time.
It really is.
In that way.
We feel untethered. I've written about it. And we have algorithms
I was just going to bring that up.
That reward, conflict, conspiracy, and it doesn't reward factual reporting. No one clicks on nuance.
Because people want to have their views reaffirmed. It feels comfortable to them. And anything other than that, anything that challenges their own identity. And that's scary and that's threatening, right?
Right.
And so they want to go back into to their little bubble or echo chamber that makes them feel good and comfy and cozy.
Right.
And I really am concerned that there's just not the respect and deference and reverence for just the truth and facts and evidence that there once was. And Trump's lie about the election being stolen is a prime example of that. He
persistent.
Says it over and over again, and you can have your own theories about why.
Reasonable people believe it now.
Yeah, but like all the facts and evidence shows otherwise, right?
Georgia's election was run by Republicans. Right, they looked at it over and over and over again.
Exactly. And so that, to me, that scares me.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, no matter what, emotion will always win out over facts, sadly.
Yeah.
That is just the truth. And like, for a lot of people, it's the emotion of
and the
it,
repetition.
And the repetition, once you say it enough, it gets in their head and they start, seeds of doubt. Well, wait a second. Maybe it was stolen.
I hate to say it, but it follows patterns of really ugly chapters in our world's history. It's stunning how similar the patterns of rhetoric are. I have a couple more questions. One, sort of talking about your role at CNN, and you are in DC. Mm-hmm. I have heard criticism, and I've observed this myself. The CNN bureau in DC seems to really punch above its weight. Like, it really is a sort of a nexus of, the network. A lot of programming comes from DC, as it should. Mm-hmm. But one of the criticisms is that CNN maybe focuses too much on inside the Beltway, Capitol Hill drama. And credit to Manu Raju, who's best in class.
He's amazing.
And I do see how, DC political maneuvering is a story worth covering. But does it sometimes come at the cost of some real world coverage of what's happening in Middle America? Do you feel that sometimes it's a little navel-gazy or solipsistic in the kind of DC world way?
Well, if you watch my show, you will see that we don't do horse race politics panels, and that's a deliberate decision. There are others at CNN who are much better at that than I am, first and foremost. But what I can speak to is what I do for the show, and I think that can tell you a lot.
Right.
My team knows what is very important to me is getting everyday Americans on the show. So when there's a government shutdown or, health premiums or health insurance premiums are going up, like, let's get that person who's in Kansas or Kentucky or Texas who is really worried about how this is going to impact them, because there's no better way to understand it than the actual person rather than having a talking head, right? That's always been my view. And then we have John King, who I really am jealous of him and his job, because I would love to do that. Just like go out in the country and talk to people and bring their stories back to Washington.
He's a modern day Jack Kerouac.
He's amazing. He's amazing. And his stories are always really illuminating. And so anytime he does that, I'm like, get his piece on the show, get John King on, let's talk about that. Like, what are people out in the country saying and thinking? And I was doing this radio segment. We shifted to Michael Smerconish to do it because he has his own radio show.
Sure.
But the whole point of it is, what are callers saying? What are the people who listen to your show? What are they calling in and saying to you?
Real feedback.
Real feedback from people all across the country. And so I just had Michael Smerconish on today to talk about that. Like, what are your listeners saying about a partial government shutdown? Do they even care?
It's
like, are they
unfiltered,
even paying
right.
attention to it? And he's like, no, actually, they're not, unless they're in a TSA line and it's forever. Like, they're not paying attention to that. And so he's able to be our vehicle for what listeners across the country are thinking and feeling about what's happening in Washington. So that's my personal approach.
When you went to Taylor, Texas, or Moscow, Idaho, it seems like a trap for DC or New York-based media outlets to go to other places and to avoid almost like social anthropology. You see some reports that feel like, look at how these people live. It's almost like sort of like
they're in a zoo, like they're at the zoo.
Like a National Geographic, like zoo animals. Do you know what I'm saying? And I think because perhaps you grew up in Kentucky, you've not been able to do that. You've been able to sort of avoid that. But did you find that was something that you had to be aware of, that like engaging, or did you just connect with the subjects as sort of?
No, I didn't. I don't know. I just look at human beings as we're all humans, and we're all struggling in our own ways and suffering. I just go and I'm like, I want to understand what you're thinking. Help me understand it, right? Like, I personally, I didn't feel that way. Again, like, we all are born into a situation, like you were talking about earlier on the Nepo baby. I was born into a family. I didn't choose that. I feel blessed and all the things, but there were struggles that came with that, right? I didn't have a conventional upbringing, and I always just think humans are born into the world, into whatever family situation you're put into, and then you just kind of like figure it out, and then you do the best you can, and then you learn it and you grow. And so we're all in that together, right? And so no matter where you are, how you're living, it's like, I just like connecting with humans at that basic level and understanding. This is another thing I wanted to say, as just going back to the Nepo baby thing. I thought a lot about this too. So I want to ask people who would be critical, say, oh, you're just in this because of that. Like, so what do you want then for me to do? Should I just stay in my room all day and do nothing and like twirl my hair? Or should I do the thing that I'm really passionate about and I love to do, and I feel like is what I'm meant to do, right? And I've always thought about that. Like,
I think that's the right answer.
Right.
But to be honest with you, I don't think anyone really, I don't think that you're considered a Nepo baby. Like, I don't think that, I think Nepo babies get that criticism because of not just who their parents are, but, the opportunities and really their behavior and their attitude. And I think that, as I've said repeatedly, and I think you're just fishing for compliments at this point.
Well, should I start doing my prima donna, like yelling at the staff?
Get me my
coffee.
So last question. Was it last year that you started co-anchoring the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer? Is he as difficult to work with as he seems?
Oh gosh, Wolf Blitzer, let me tell you, talk about a prima donna.
No, he seems like the sweetest, nicest man in the whole world. He
actually is. Like, I'm not just saying this because he's my co-anchor, and I have to say this. He actually is the easiest person to work with and the nicest person, and he is so respectful and lovely to everyone. It doesn't matter who you are. He just loves everyone. He has dance parties before the show. You know, he'll put on his music. He loves music.
What does Wolf Blitzer rock with it?
Oh my God, Chumbawamba is one of his favorites. You know, he's got a lot that would really surprise you. He loves Taylor Swift. And so like play music before, and we're all like dancing and singing, and there's no ego. Like the man could have the biggest ego in the world. He's an icon.
He is. And
he's nothing but a true professional. And if I want to jump in, if he's doing an interview and ask a question, he'll be like, yeah, Pam, come in. You know, it's not like, this is my airtime. He's
not difficult.
No, he's the opposite of that. And I feel really, really blessed to sit next to him every day and learn from him. Yeah.
He's a mensch.
He is. The man is amazing. And I can't say anything bad about him. And I don't think anyone in the D.C. Bureau, anyone who knows him could.
No, I can confirm my reporting. I've been digging dirt on him for a long time. I got nothing.
You still have nothing?
No, he seems to be he's earned a great reputation from being a great dude. So I think this has been a great rehearsal. I think we should start taping.
Okay, should we? Let's get it going. Let's get the camera rolling. Absolutely.
Pamela Brown, co-anchor of Situation Room. I look forward to watching your whole story talk on Christian nationalism. Thank you so much for coming in. This has been a great conversation.
This has been a lot of fun.
It's been great.
Thank you for giving it the time.
Good stuff. Thanks for watching.